the Sixers have got the headlines, but the Phillies have been sneaky the last 2 weeks. No, they haven't signed Bryce Harper or Scott Lauber, but they did make a smart move last week in a trade, and today I thought a very smart move by getting out of the arbitration hearing with Aaron Nola. How are you, pal?
Good, Mike. How are you?
All is well. The Real Muto move kind of happened on the trade deadline day, so that kind of got swept under the rug a little bit. Probably shouldn't have, but the move today to get Nola locked up and at 4 for 45, I thought was a really good deal by Clintac.
Yeah, not just avoids the arbitration hearing, which would have been tomorrow, but also locks him up through at least, 2022, and there's a club option in that contract for 2023, at which point he'll still be just 30 years old. So, yeah, it gets it does a couple of things. I mean, it gets Aaron Nola a little bit of financial security at a time when the climate for free agents is not so hot.
No.
I think if you're Aaron Nola and you look around and, last year you saw your teammate Jake Arrieta not sign until mid-March. This year you see a pretty good lefty out on the market in Dallas Keuchel, who's still not signed, and it's spring training, and pitchers and catchers have reported to camp. And, I asked Nola about 2 or 3 weeks ago when he was in town in Philly, I asked him whether the slowness of free agency was something that kind of caught his attention, and whether, as somebody who had that sort of, looming for him 2 or 3 years down the line, whether he was more interested in a long-term deal. And at that time he said, he really hadn't thought about it, and he was probably going to, at least for now, take it more year to year through arbitration and whatnot. But, I do think the more players look around, the more they see what the climate is, and they realize that if they can get some security now, it pushes free agency maybe down the road a year or two, perhaps when there's a more friendly CBA for the players, perhaps, or maybe the situation is a little bit different than it is now. But I don't think anyone's rushing into free agency the way they used to, and so Nola gets a little bit of that, and the Phillies certainly get some cost certainty on their best pitcher. It's not going to break the bank to have Aaron Nola for the next 4 years at a minimum. The 4 more years that should be prime years for him, and you can take a shot at a couple of World Series and hope that you have him around for that, and then kind of fill in the rest of your team from there. So, it's a deal that makes some sense for both sides, but certainly I think for the Phillies, if you're looking around and you're figuring out how to structure your team, you got to be thrilled to have your best pitcher on a relatively team-friendly deal now for the next 4 years.
Yeah, 4-year, 45. It's also a fifth-year club option at $16 million. So they lock him up through 2022 and potentially 2023. So good job there. They buy out some arbitration time, and they get their ace, who, by the way, last year 17-6, 2.37 ERA, but 0.975 WHIP, which is outstanding, and just 25 years old. Scott, a lot of stuff happening down there. Jake Arrieta needed knee surgery last month to help out a meniscus injury. Number one, did this have anything to do with his less than stellar late season? And number two, will this affect his spring training? We saw him sign late last year. Is he going to be able to pitch in any spring training games?
Both good questions. From what I understand, no, it doesn't have anything to do with his fade down the stretch last year. Apparently, this is something that came up last month. He was doing kind of a weight training exercise, felt something not quite so right with his knee, and underwent this surgery, which the Phillies are describing as minor, simply to kind of clean up some issues with his meniscus in his left knee. I remember years and years ago Brad Lidge having a meniscus cleanup in spring training and was ready for the start of the season. I don't recall. I think that was before. I know he had issues in both 08 and 09, so obviously 1 year was a great year for him and 1 year was a horrible year for him. With Arrieta, in terms of being ready for the season, they're hopeful that he will be. Now, something to keep in mind is that I think they have 3 off days in the first 8 days of the season. So they could go through the rotation one time without needing him to make that first start. he could make his first start a little while later, and they won't need a fifth starter. So I think they could go until, I know we're getting way, way, way ahead of ourselves here, but to something like April 9th or 10th before they need Jake Arrieta to make a start. So if they need to slow play it with him in spring training, if he needs to, take a little bit of extra time, they can afford to do that without needing another starter in his place once the season starts. So, but that's for down the road. Right now, they're hopeful. I mean, look, he was on the field today. None of us knew anything about this, in fact, until Gabe Kapler told us there was no reason to suspect that Arrieta had anything happen because he was in uniform and on the field. So, they say it's minor, and for now, I guess fans have to kind of take them at their word that it's not anything that's going to keep him sidelined for a long period of time.
Yeah, year 2 of that 3-year, $75 million deal, Arrieta. I guess another question before we jump to some other things, is Arrieta still going to be number 2, or do you think they will find between now and Atlanta at the end of March when they open the season another guy in that rotation?
Well, I've been somebody who's been pretty clear throughout the offseason that I think that they're at least one pitcher short. And so for me, if I put my GM hat on, Dallas Keuchel is out there, and I wouldn't be surprised if when all is said and done, he ends up signing a deal similar to Arrieta last year that was a little bit below what a lot of us figured his market value would be when the offseason began. Arrieta wound up with a 3-year deal, $75 million. I think he started the offseason looking for a 5-year deal in the 9-figure range, right around $100 million. So, the Phillies, by waiting as long as they did until the middle of March, I think probably got Arrieta at a little bit of a lower commitment than they otherwise would have. I wonder whether Keuchel at this point falls into that category, and if he does, I would certainly be in line to sign him if I were the Phillies. So we'll see. They've been pretty people I've talked to in the organization have been pretty clear that they like what they've got, and I think unless something comes to them where someone's market sort of falls apart a little bit, or somebody can be had on a lower term deal, I think that they're content to go into the season with what they have. But this news today about Arrieta doesn't do anything for me except strengthen the idea that they still need another pitcher, and if it ends up being somebody like Dallas Keuchel, I think he could really help them.
Yeah, and Eichhoff, too. I mean, he looks like a setback here, reoccurring symptoms, as you tweeted out. He had carpal tunnel at the end of last season, so it's something, doesn't seem like he's a guy they can count on.
Right, and, especially coming off of a year last year where he, really missed the entire season. I mean, except for that late start, late in the year. Then he had the carpal tunnel surgery, and everything was supposed to be full go for spring training, and now it seems he's had a little bit of a recurrence of symptoms last month, and it sounds like he might be a little bit delayed in terms of being ready for the start of the season. And he was somebody who, I think they thought, and they probably still think, can compete for a spot in the rotation in spring training, but at the very least would be a guy who could be a depth starter for them, a guy who could step into that rotation if an injury came up, or if one of the 3 guys at the back end, Pivetta, Velasquez, or Eflin, struggled. And I think they felt like Eichhoff was very much in that mix. So, at this point, you wonder how much can they count on him, and that also, I think, again, further strengthens, for me at least, the belief that they're a pitcher short, and they need to go out and improve their depth a little bit in that area, or maybe get somebody who's more than just a depth guy, a guy who can really be a kind of a number 2 to number 3 quality caliber starter for them.
Scott Lauber with us from the Inquirer here, and you can follow him at Scott Lauber. Phillies in spring training, they are down. Stuff that you tweeted today from the coach, manager Gabe Kapler. Third base looks like it's going to be an open competition, and I'm interested in this because, all right, let's say Franco wins it. Then what happens to Kingery? If Kingery wins it, what happens to Franco? And is Kingery not going to be given the opportunity to win a battle someplace else?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. First of all, let's be clear that under all of this Kingery-Franco third base talk is the fact that Manny Machado is still not signed, and the Phillies are still highly interested in Manny Machado. So were Manny Machado to sign with the Phillies, this whole issue of who plays third base is rendered pretty moot. because we'd have our answer. So this is kind of predicated on the idea that Machado goes somewhere else, and if that happens, who plays third? And, it was interesting today that Kapler Kapler opened the door to a third base competition in spring training. And if you do that, and if it's between Franco and Kingery, to me it's more interesting what happens to Franco if Kingery wins the job, because we all know Kingery is more suited to be kind of that utility guy. I still believe that that's what the Phillies want him to be this year, is a utility guy who can play 4 or 5 days a week at 3 or 4 different positions, kind of rotate through that lineup and help give guys days off. Franco doesn't have that kind of versatility. He's pretty much third base or bust. So he would be rendered pretty much a right-handed bat off the bench in a very right-handed lineup as it is. So, for me, if you're going to open up that competition at third base and Kingery winds up outplaying Franco in spring training, I don't know that Maikel Franco has a clear role on the team. So, that was sort of what I was left thinking about after he said that. And again, like I said, underneath all of this is the fact that neither of these guys might be starting at third base on opening day if they sign Manny Machado.
Scott Lauber, Phillies down there in Clearwater. How's the weather down there, man?
A little chilly, 60 degrees or so, pushing 60. It's a little chilly today. We had some rain. I know I'm not going to get any weather sympathy from anyone back home. But
it's not bad here today. It's like 40, no rain. It's nice, not too terrible.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, so not too bad. Has the snow melted yet?
The snow is gone. Yeah, you bastard. Yes, the snow is gone, but, I'm going a week later this year, so I'm hoping, because the last couple of years I've been in Clearwater, honestly, the weather has not been great down there. Like, I feel like it's getting chillier each year, but this year I'm going the last week of spring training to hope to get some better weather this year. So.
Okay. So, like by the end of March, yeah. I mean,
19th.
It'll be.
I'm going the 19th to the 26th this year, and I'm actually going to get to see the last game of spring training, and then they play 2 days later. So, it's going to be a good chance to kind of see the end. But I'm hoping that the weather has not been great the last couple of years. Got to be honest.
Yeah, there's usually like a week in February where it's a little rocky, just in terms of like you got to wear a light coat and you got to kind of, you sort of say to yourself, "Is this Florida? It's not what I bargained for."
Yeah.
And it feels like it always happens in February, but I don't know. Hopefully by March you'll be in the clear.
I don't know where you stay, Scott, but I typically, when the Phillies start, I will give the listeners my places to hit in Clearwater. So I'm going to do that when we're finished here, different places to go. Do you have any places that you would tell the listeners that they have to make sure they visit if they go to Clearwater or Clearwater Beach?
You know what's funny is so I covered the Phillies from 2006 to 2009, and in the middle of spring training in 2010, I left for a job in Boston, so I covered the Red Sox in between. I got back here last year, but I missed spring training. I covered the Red Sox in spring training and came back in April. So I've been down here now for a few days, and for me, it's like playing catch-up. It's like, okay, what was here in 2010 that I remember that's still here, and I want to go back to. So, that's a better question. I'd have a better answer to that question in a couple of weeks once I get my lay of the land. But I will say this, I was always partial to Frenchies, and I'm still partial to Frenchies. So any opportunity to go to Frenchies on Clearwater Beach is something I would highly recommend.
All right. Well, I don't know how often you get down to the beach area, but if you do, make sure you hit up the Clearwater Bait House, all right?
Oh, okay.
Make sure. It's right on when you go over the bridge into Clearwater Beach. You'll see it on the left-hand side. It's like a bait and tackle shop, but in the back, they've got a bar, the restaurant deck that looks like this old place that's beat up. It is the best seafood I've ever had. Best.
All right. Well, I'll take you up on it, and I'll let you know what I think.
All right, pal. We'll see you soon.
Okay, sounds good.
Scott Lauber here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN.